this is the first time in my life, and I've seen international development, I've seen all kinds of different things in my 20 years. This is the first time in my career that I'm seeing profit and purpose being connected so obviously together, right? You literally have a civilization scale crisis married to the idea that the next 1,000 unicorns will come from this sector. What are you doing? Why are you not doing climate? I mean, just as I would have said 20 years ago, why are you not doing internet? I was like, why are you not doing climate? I don't get it. Why are you working on anything else?
Welcome, Anshuman, on the Climapreneur Show. I'm extremely excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Shweta. Excited to be here.
So, Anshuman, before we actually enter into what Terra is, and also I have got some really amazing points that you have made. So, I would really like to delve deeper into it. For example, that where is climate economy today and how it can be bigger than the internet economy. But before that, I would really like to answer this: that what does the hope in your heart says for Terra? Like, what's your dream with Terra, and what do you want it to be, and how is it different from where it is now?
Sure. So, our mission is very
Hmm.
simple and very ambitious, which is to get 100 million people working in climate this decade.
Yes.
And this decade is the decade of climate action. A lot of what we do this decade will determine what the rest
Hmm.
of the century would look like, even.
Yeah.
So, and what the big problem statement that we wanted to go after was that we need a significant part of the world's GDP
Hmm.
transformed in these next 10 years, and that will take talent, that'll take people, and that'll take people of all different kinds. So,
Yep.
where we want to get to is to be this ramp that will take out the friction
Hmm.
for anyone who is outside climate to start working in climate.
Yeah.
And they could be coming from any background.
Hmm. And that's the beauty of it, because I have felt this one thing like a lot of times, that we need diverse set of people working towards one common goal, but in their own diverse ways. And that is how, because climate action today is transdisciplinary, right?
Completely agree. Uh, yeah, in fact, that is one of our key tenets, which
Mm.
is that there is no silver bullet to solving for climate.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's funny when you come in from outside climate, like I did, into climate, you
Me too.
realize suddenly, right? You realize suddenly that even inside climate, there are all these camps sometimes,
Yes.
right? So some, for example, are in the technology camp where they think
Mm.
that technology will solve all problems. Some who think it's the economics camp and
Mm.
something like a carbon tax or some economic
Yep.
solution will solve all problems. There are others who are in the global north and global south kind of a camp saying, look, this is a historical injustice
Mm.
that has been perpetrated, and the only way it gets solved is by making this enormous amount of wealth and technology transfer
Yep.
from the global north to the global south, and more. And the reality is, like it always is, that all of them are right, but incomplete
Mm.
in their own way. And
Yes.
so, therefore, you need people who are coming in from very different perspectives,
Mm.
people who are coming from very different backgrounds and professional skills, who have to be able to solve it. And I'm happy to go deeper into as we go further down the podcast, but there are lots and lots of layers to unpack here.
Yes, no, definitely you're right here. Also, Anshuman, tell me that what made you realize the need for Terra, and how did you find a market that needs to be addressed in that need?
So my background, Shweta, as you can see, has nothing to do with climate.
Hmm.
I've been a tech entrepreneur all my life. I have started multiple tech companies, sold a few of them, worked at large places like Google. But I always had this a bit of a streak about organizing people around a social problem.
Hmm.
Back in when I was an undergrad in IIT, I ended up starting the entrepreneurship cell and the
Hmm.
incubator and a bunch of things which are all focused on entrepreneurship back in 1999. And
Yep.
that was because everyone around me was saying, oh, go get a job at an MNC or go get a master's from the US. And
Hmm.
on a whim, I would say, but why can't we just start companies? Like, why do we have to
Right.
do all this? So there was one part of that. Then my internships, for example, that I did was selling solar lights in Vietnam, as an
Hmm.
example, or working with a politician in Delhi to work to help in East Delhi to
Hmm.
solve the solid waste management problem.
Hmm.
And in fact, I ended up starting a nonprofit which ran for many years called Democracy Connect, which would take people like you and I and get them to work with elected representatives of any party
Okay.
on specifically on either legislation or constituency development.
Mm-hmm.
So very back office, uncool work, but really important work. So there was always this streak. And then I have two kids. I have now a 13-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. And when kids happen, these kind of things also start settling in your inside you a little bit more. And I had taken it for granted that the world will obviously be a better place for my kids, right? And then 2016 happened, and everything from Trump to
Yeah.
Brexit, and then we were also we were traveling to Australia to the Great Barrier Reef, and we it was beautiful. My daughter, who was older, was able to snorkel. She was singing in the water. My son was too young to be able to do that, so he was on the boat. And that year was the first year of the mass bleachings that killed a large fraction of the coral reef.
Yep.
And to me, this realization that, look, I've been taking it for granted that the world will continue to be as is for my kids. You can't take it for granted. This
Yes.
entire thing might disappear unless we start working on it. So that to me was kind of a bit of a wake up call to go and start actively putting myself and my skills to use in this space.
Like when you actually had that moment of realization, because a lot of times, like I have listened to this thing from a lot of people that, okay, I feel for this cause, but this is so big, the problem is overwhelmingly big. So what was the first step you take to Anshuman? I want every person who is listening to us right now who's thinking, okay, I care for oceans, but what can I individually do, or will my steps even matter?
Yeah.
So what was your first step towards this, towards solving this?
No, it's a great question, Shweta. And I think the enormity of the challenge is such. In fact, it's kind of funny. There is almost like this stages that one goes through, right? One when you're kind of completely outside this problem and it's happening in the
Yeah.
newspapers, in the media at most, maybe with a few friends, and then you start paying attention to it for some reason, curious, and then at some point in time when the realization hits that this is probably the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced, and you're living right in that generation, the one generation which has the power to potentially fix it or not, it suddenly feels this massive, enormous burden on yourself and say, oh my God. And then you freak out. And then you say, you know what? Let me look away all over again. Or maybe
Mm.
instead of taking plastic bags, let me take my jute bag
Jute
and pat
bags.
myself on the back that I've done my bit. And that's
Mm.
okay. And then I can move on, carrying on with my life. And to me, that is not how you take action.
Mm.
I think the first thing, the steps to take action, but the very first step is to educate yourself, right? And then try to educate people around you. Second is you should definitely look at your lifestyle and
Mm.
see where is the highest impact thing that you can do. The highest impact thing might not be substituting your single use plastics with your jute bag. It might be the kind of food you eat or kind of transportation that you
Yeah.
take, and maybe in the local community that you live in, how waste
Mm.
segregation happens and so on. But then don't stop there. You're not just an individual who consumes resources,
Mm.
right? You're a human being with networks and skills. And at
Yes.
that time, look at your skills, see what you've learned. And you might be a college student, but you have real skills. Look at your skills and find an application for them
Mm.
inside climate solutions. And it could be very small. It could be, for example, that you do some great at researching on the internet. So you go
Yep.
research on the internet and write a definitive guide to
Mm.
what a certain climate solution looks like. And
Yes.
that will attract other people and so on. So use your skills is kind of my
Mm.
only dictum to you. You are not a powerless human being. And ultimately, I think climate is politics. And politics, all of us, not just in India, but across the world, think of it as a bad word. To me,
Mm.
politics is the ultimate art of making compromises and moving forward. And there is something genuinely good about it. It might be done in a bad way, but there's something
Mm.
genuinely good and important about it. So if we think climate is not politics, I think we're deluding ourselves. So to me, and if you look at America, for example, the climate debate got to the point where it is right now, where both Democrats and Republicans are talking about their own climate solutions,
Mm.
right? It happened because, first of all, of people like you, of your generation, who woke up and said, what the hell? We have to fix this problem. But second, also because they managed to make it a political issue. And then you had political entrepreneurs come up and stake their careers to it and say, you know what, I will be successful if the climate movement becomes successful. I think that's the same thing that is required in India across the world. So ultimately, climate is politics, but you have to start with your actions and with your
Anshuman, would
skills.
you say that climate is only politics, or politics is just a small element of climate? Because, like, I want you like to clarify on this. For example, any person who is listening to us right now who might think that, okay, like if it's all politics, why should I even do something? Why should I change my ways? Why should I give my life towards this issue? So, what would you say to some a person like that?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, politics is not exogenous to us.
Hmm.
We build politics. We are the
Yes.
voters and so on, right? So first of all, you're not outside the system, you're inside the system. That's
Inside the
one.
system, right?
But second is politics is one important, but not the only part, as you said,
Yeah.
right? Now, a great example would be technology.
Hmm.
So we now across the world talk about deploying renewables as fast as we can,
Hmm.
right? India has taken all kinds of very impressive, aggressive targets and
Yeah.
delivered on quite a few of them. So has is America, and Europe is also moving in that
Hmm.
direction. 10 years ago, that was not possible because technology hadn't really worked well enough to bring the costs down to a point where politically it was now possible to choose between coal and renewables.
Yeah.
Now it totally is. You
Hmm.
still have vote bank politics, you still have vested interests in politics and so on, but the economics have been brought down dramatically and made
Yes.
comparable because of technology. At the same time, and that's why to me why climate is such an interesting, vexing problem is because it interlinks everything that we do on this planet, right? Look at India. In India, we have massive renewable energy potential. Look at this amount of sun that shines, the amount of wind
Hmm.
that is possible across our coastlines, and so on. We can be a clean energy powerhouse
Yeah.
easily, right? At the same time, we have a coal sector which gives directly or indirectly about 10 million people jobs.
Hmm.
These jobs are actually in the most impoverished parts of the country,
Yes.
right? They're not in Bombay, they're
No.
not in Delhi, they are in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh and so on and
Hmm.
on, where the amount of renewables potential may be large, small, etc., etc. Which means that you have a justice problem as well,
Hmm.
which is if we were to transition wholesale from coal into renewables, what do we do with the 10 million people? How do
Yeah.
we bring new kinds of livelihoods to them?
Hmm.
So these are all interlinked. And therefore, to me, the one place where all kinds of interlinking gets solved in a good way or in a bad way is whether we like it or not, it's politics.
It's
So
politics.
what you do is that you have, first of all, spend time understanding how deeply the
Hmm.
interlinked these are, and then pick your skills and your part and start solving for that because it will feed into every other solution.
Do you also think that, because I felt this thing like quite often, that when we say, like, for example, what you mentioned about the people like at the coal mines and everyone, sometimes we just give statements that are one sided, but we fail to understand that there are two sides of it. Like, while even developing climate solutions, we need to be more inclusive. We need to be, we need to come from a zone of empathy actually. Because also I feel that if government and politics that you mentioned, if they become more transparent, like they put forward the challenges they are facing, would that make this that this entire thing a lot more easier? Because I have like read a lot of case studies which mention that when the government is making decision, a lot of time they have to trade different kind of SDGs, and which a lot of times is not an easy choice to make, for example what you just mentioned. So, do you think that just being transparent about the challenges we are facing, we can make this even more, the system more better? Because, like, for example, when someone says politics, the first impression we get in our mind is something negative. Like, we are all like
Yeah.
all over, like head on, climate and politics. Why are they just, like ready to clash? Why can't we as a nation move together with politics? Like, why can't we empower each? Like, I agree, like, there are so many negatives to it. I agree, but there are some positives too, right? So, what is stopping us from moving together, and why does that thing always happens? Like, why is there always a clash?
Yeah. See, I think if you look at climate problems,
Hmm.
it's a classic example of where the profits are borne by a few, but the
Hmm.
costs are borne by millions,
Right.
right? Which means that the few who have the profits have the incentive
Hmm.
and the power to manipulate whatever system that they are in front of. And we know, and politics and Indian politics is no different from politics in most parts of the world, right?
Hmm.
Um, there are vested interests with deep pockets who want the status quo,
Hmm.
right? So I think the what I see, for example, really powerfully
Hmm.
happening is places like, for example, the civic movements that are happening around in places like Bangalore, Mumbai, and so on, and Delhi for that matter. Uh, as an example, Janagrah is this nonprofit that works in Bangalore, right? Whose job is to very boring job in theory, which is to say, can we make public finances transparent? And
Hmm.
what is their smart thinking? The smart thinking is that can we make public finances transparent in the sense that every citizen of Bangalore can actually see where money is being spent on a line item basis.
Hmm.
Now, if that happens, suddenly you've shown sunlight on a part of working of the government that was not evident. And you have to also remember that the government is, for the vast majority, believe it or not, also populated by people who are trying to do the right thing, but inside a system whose incentives are very broken.
Hmm.
Right? And Bangalore is a great example. I mean, if a city which probably, I mean, if India's IT sector is 8% of our GDP, and India is minting what, two unicorns every week or whatever, some crazy number
Yeah.
like that, there must be tons of tax revenue.
Hmm.
But if you go out onto the roads of Bangalore, that tax revenue is nowhere to be seen. Right? So they, and that is, to me, it feels like therefore you can't run away from politics. You might define politics as what is happening inside your mohalla, inside your
Hmm.
local community. Start from there. But if we believe politics is outside us, then I think we're making a mistake. And climate does not get solved unless all of
Hmm.
these things together, technology, economics, but also
Hmm.
politics.
Okay. So, like this is one of your statements, and I found it very interesting. I would really like you to break this down for our listeners. So, you said that the climate economy today is where the internet economy was 20 years ago, and 20 years from now, the climate economy will be possibly bigger than the internet is now. So, Anshuman, like, tell me that how is this related to every person who is listening to us or watching to us right now?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the question that I would ask everyone is that do you feel that you individually who's listening to this podcast have somehow a stake in the internet economy today,
Hmm.
right? It might be to the extent that, look, I can't live my life without ordering food on Zomato, right? But then you have a stake in the internet economy.
Yeah.
There's a strong likelihood that you're reliant on a bunch of different services
Hmm.
that are actually coming from that internet economy. And if one day, if I pull out the internet economy, you will actually find your life significantly less richer,
Yes.
which means that all of us now, especially in the metropolitan areas and maybe even beyond that, have a stake in the internet economy right now.
Hmm.
Now, what I'm saying is that the climate economy is going to be just as big and just as meaningful to your lives, maybe even more so. And
Hmm.
why do I say that? So, first, the economics part of it. The economics part of it is that back in '99, when I started my internet company, at that time, internet was this cute little thing on the side, right?
Hmm.
It was kind of this new, exciting sector, maybe something to do with media connected to that, but that is it. And
Yeah.
we thought, oh, when Netflix came along, Netflix was a competitor to Blockbuster,
Hmm.
right? But what we are seeing with the Oscars, right? Netflix is a competitor to Hollywood,
Hmm.
right? So Hollywood is kind of like the big established gorilla, and Blockbuster was this tiny little thing that we thought Netflix was competing with.
Hmm.
So that's, I think, what has happened with the internet, which is that internet has become now the underpinning of everything we do, including our
Hmm.
politics. And now, if I say, oh, internet is also a significant player in our political systems, nobody will bat an eyelid. But 5 years ago, we would have said, oh, but no, not really. Really, are you sure? So that's where internet is, and roughly about 17 to 20% of the world's GDP is connected to the internet economy or
Hmm.
directly coming from there. Roughly 300 to 400 million people work in the internet economy, depending on how you count.
Yeah.
The corresponding numbers for climate, uh, in various different ways that you look at, is that roughly about 7% of the world's GDP right now is the
Hmm.
green economy. That number is growing dramatically fast. And my suspicion is that in the next 10, 15 years, we'll get to the point where that will also become 15 to 20% of
Hmm.
the world's GDP. Now, why? Right? We're talking about fundamentally transforming energy.
Hmm.
right? And energy is the underpinning of civilization. It's not just some little sector on the side. We are all kind of unaware of it because it's like air. But we're talking about fundamentally transforming energy, which is about 11 to 12% of the world's GDP, completely transforming agriculture, which is in terms of GDP somewhat similar, but in terms of number of people employed, especially in a place like India, even more so. We're talking about fundamentally transforming transportation, manufacturing, construction, and even horizontals like finance, right? How capital flows from one place to the other. If
Hmm.
you add all this up, and sure, there's some double counting, you're talking about half of the world's GDP being transformed, not like incrementally changed, but transformed in the next 10, 20 years. And why transformed? Not because, oh, we are really good people at heart and we really want to, we feel bad about the environment. It's because the climate crisis is going to inundate our cities.
Hmm.
Right? Bombay will be underwater, right,
Hmm.
up to Powai or
Yep.
Ghatkopar. That is not some, we're not talking about, oh, let's do some CSR stuff on the side.
Hmm.
This is life and death. And life and death, not just for the poor people, which it always is, but even for the rich and the elites. So to me, it
Yes.
feels like whether you like it or not, you
Hmm.
will be working in the climate economy most likely in the next 10, 15 years.
Hmm.
You might be sitting inside a financial institution and being forced to now look at your loan portfolio and assess climate risk, whether
Hmm.
you like it or not, whether you deny climate change or not, right? And so on. So to me, this is therefore going to be a massive part of every economic activity that we do. And therefore, because every crisis has an opportunity, therefore, to me, this also feels like the a once in a lifetime, even bigger than internet opportunity
Yes.
to transform economies, to transform the way we do different systems like energy and agriculture and so on.
And how is Terra helping people, to be a part of this transition, to, to take this opportunity? Like, what are you doing at Terra that will align people to this?
Yeah. So first of all, what is Terra, right? So
Hmm.
Terra is the global platform for working in climate. That's
Yep.
what we're building. Now, what does it mean to work in climate? To me, it means everything from being this asset manager looking at climate risk in your loan portfolio to a farmer who is doing regenerative farming as
Hmm.
opposed to this very non-climate friendly kind of farming.
Right.
Now, what does it take to go from where you and I were, say, a few months, a few years ago, to where we are now, where we are firmly working in
Hmm.
the climate economy? I think it's a combination of three things: learning, jobs, and community.
Yes.
Now, learning is very central and important because, by definition, because you're saying the vast majority of people who will be working in climate by the end of this decade are actually outside it right now.
Hmm.
Therefore, by definition, everyone who's going to come to this space is going to be quote unquote new to it and would need to reorient themselves and say, okay,
Yep.
where do I point my guns to? So that's where
Hmm.
learning is very central. And that's what we have built. So we have built all these learning programs that range from a program for anyone who's just trying to get a sense of climate, like a boot camp, but to a program on hydrogen for somebody working in energy, to a program on electric vehicles who's working in that segment, to a program on farming, climate friendly farming, if someone is inclined to that, and so on. So that's one part of it, learning. At the other end, you have to connect it to jobs, right? Because
Hmm.
people are saying, look, learning to what end?
Yep.
And there, the climate economy is beginning to ramp up very, very quickly. And not equally in all parts of the world. I would say that India is beginning to catch up there.
Hmm.
But in the US, for example, last year, climate was the second largest venture capital category.
Hmm.
I mean, US is the world's largest venture capital segment by any stretch. And on top of that, climate became this massive category there. India will get there very, very soon, right? So therefore, there is that uh, part of it as well. So I think that's the jobs part of it. That's creating all these companies which are creating all these jobs. But ultimately, and this is I think where we take a point of departure from the typical, well, let's create a marketplace where jobs and learning and everything can come together. I think what we really need is to build a community of like-minded people,
Hmm.
and therefore, what Terra is trying to build is the world's largest community of people working in climate. Because we can, at the discussion that we were having, Shweta, earlier, you can easily solve climate in a very bad way, right? You might create 10 trillionaires like Elon Musk, and the rest of us are kind of living our sorry lives in autocratic systems in with sea levels rising all around us, etc., etc. So we think it's very important to create this very diverse set of experiences where and millions of people actually coming together and collaborating in all kinds of different ways and making sure
Yes.
we don't reperpetuate, recreate all the inequality and all the bad stuff
Mm.
that we did with our previous systems. So therefore, that community is really, really important. And ultimately, that's what I think we're building. We're trying to build the world's largest community of people working in climate.
And like I hope that that it's going to be the largest community. And I feel that your why is amazing. And like, although you're not from the climate background, but the way you've sort of educated yourself, the way you've learned about it is something incredible. And I feel that this is something we can exactly learn from you. Apart from what you've done with Terra, this is one thing which I personally loved about you. You're not from this community, but the kind of the way you've educated yourself is amazing and commendable. So also I would like to ask you this question here, Anshuman, that what are your thoughts on carbon credits? And do you think that there is an opportunity for climate entrepreneurs and small businesses, especially there, which they can leverage at a very early stage, like something which happened with bitcoins or NFTs? Do you think that climate credits are just like something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm lucky to have this incredible co-founder, Kamal, who has actually worked in the climate space for 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
And she has a very strong point of view on the other end of carbon credits and carbon offsets, and which I respect a lot. So let me kind of go back from first principles first, which is that, look, the most important thing that we can do to solve for climate right now is to make sure no more fossil fuels get burned.
Yeah.
Fossil fuels remain in the ground. That is the highest impact thing that all of us can do.
Mm.
Whatever requires technology, political pressure, whatever have you.
Mm.
So let's not forget that fact before we get to shinier objects like carbon offsets or
Mm.
NFTs on top of that and so on. Now, having said that, my personal view is that uh, we are so late in the game right
Mm.
now to solve the climate crisis that we need every possible real solution.
Mm.
Right. So if you look at, for example, IPCC reports make it clear that even if we were to stop fossil fuel emissions today, we still have to do incredible amount of negative carbon. Negative carbon means
Yes.
essentially sucking carbon out of the air.
Mm.
Now, where is the technology for that? Well, there are two ends of the technology, right? There is the low tech end, which is forests, and there is the high tech end, which is all these machines that suck carbon
Mm.
out of the air.
Carbon. Yeah.
But ultimately, what unites them is this notion that getting carbon out of the atmosphere has societal value, that we should put some money behind, we should value it.
Mm.
Right? Now, carbon offsets they have a long history. So we are in I would say version through two or version three
Mm.
of this whole cycle, where the first two versions have essentially, I think, taught us what not to do.
Mm.
The amount of abuse, fraud, lack of transparency, etc., is
Yeah.
massive, right? So therefore, for someone like Kamal, who has been in this space for a long time, you can imagine like how jaded she must feel, saying, "Oh my God, we're
Mm.
starting all over again with this nonsense."
Yeah.
When we have this very fundamental problem: keep fossil fuels in the ground,
Mm.
don't get them out. That is the thing to focus on. Deploy
Mm.
renewable energy as much as you can, right?
Mm.
That's the thing to focus on. Having said that, we need all kinds of solutions. We need all kinds of capital coming in. So my point of view on this is that, look, carbon offsets have all kinds of incentive problems.
Mm.
Anybody who originates the carbon offset, which is the developer who's building that forest, as an example, the person or the entity which is verifying that those forests are real, and the corporations which are buying these offsets. If you think
Mm.
about it, none of them have the incentive to make
Mm.
sure that this is actually being done correctly in a truly environmentally friendly way.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to look the other way.
Mm.
So that's one of the things I worry a lot about carbon offsets. I think people are doing some incredible work in making sure at every layer that this
Mm.
does not happen or gets mitigated to a large extent. But I can tell
Yes.
you, carbon offsets are not too far. I mean, they're going to ramp up massively because we need them.
Mm.
A lot of technology, a lot of unicorns will get built around carbon offsets, and rightly so, right?
Mm.
A lot of companies, politicians, governments will actually definitely go down this path, which is great. But we'll also make horrendous mistakes along the way. So I think if anyone who's listening to carbon offsets right now, to this podcast and carbon offsets right now, is to say, look, this is one of the important solutions. There is, but please go in with a lot of humility and a
Hmm.
lot of eyes open, because you might entirely create a $1 trillion carbon offsets market and not make a dent in the ppm concentration of carbon
Hmm.
dioxide in the air, which is, by the way, what has happened in the past. So therefore, be very, very aware. And there, I think, again, if you look at carbon offsets specifically, the problem I feel is the hard problem is on the supply side, not on the demand side. So if you look at all blockchain solutions that are trying to create a registry, etc., I think they're important, useful, etc., etc. But we should not lose sight of the fact that the hard problem is, how do you get a forest up overnight, which is real, which is not
Exactly.
harming the
Yeah.
environment, which is
Hmm.
not taking land away from the communities which are
Hmm.
living on that land, etc., etc. And well,
Hmm.
forests are not easy. I mean, there's a reason
Yeah.
why they take a long time. So this whole notion that this is primarily a sub demand problem, I think, is misguided. I think it is fundamentally a supply problem. Demand can help it and exacerbate and kind of create a good feedback loop. But let's worry about supply even more.
Yes. No, I'm glad you mentioned, because I have heard the same thing that, for example, I buy something, but then the number amount of carbon I've offsetted is like, how much time will it take to get that carbon offset? For example, what you mentioned about the forest, I did my thing, but the forest will take time to grow, and like, are we really focusing on the timelines? Because if today I did that, that amount of carbon might be offsetted in, say, the coming 5 years, 10 years, or even more. Who knows that?
Yeah, no, in
So,
fact, one of the interesting experiments for your listeners to look at is what Stripe is doing.
hmm,
So Stripe has created a carbon offsets program where they fundamentally said, look, $5 per ton doesn't make any sense,
hmm,
right? The societal cost of carbon is actually in the hundreds of dollars, and the real solutions that actually capture carbon and store it for a long time are actually much, much costlier. They're at $1,000
yes.
plus kind of a price point.
Hmm,
Somebody has to put in the money so that technologists get the expertise in bringing that cost down as they deploy
yeah.
more to a few hundreds of dollars. But we're still talking about a few hundreds of dollars. So they're the kind of projects that they are actually funding are not even forests anymore.
Hmm,
These are projects which, for example, take calcium carbonate and take limestone and combine it with carbon and sink it into the ocean for millions of years.
hmm,
And they think that is real carbon sequestration,
hmm.
or as real as it gets. A forest that gets cut down 10 years down the line is not carbon sequestration, right? You just kind of push the can down the road, and you've probably done worse, which is pat yourself on the back and said,
Hmm.
okay, we are doing well, let's carry on our normal way of living
Yeah.
life. And then suddenly one fine day you realize, oh God, nothing has changed in
Hmm.
the ppm concentration of carbon in the
Hmm.
atmosphere.
Some incredible work is like genuinely happening, and I'm sure like you have to connect me with these guys. I would really, really love to have them on the show, because like they're doing something incredible there. So my next question to you would be, Anshuman, that what were the things that were really difficult for you while building Terra? Like, what were some of the challenges you faced on a personal level and as a team while building Terra?
So we started this company literally like a few weeks before the pandemic.
Hmm.
And what was clear to me already was that I, even before the pandemic, was that we'll build a remote only company.
Hmm.
And the reason for building a remote only company was that what is Terra? Ultimately, Terra is trying to prove that you can take talented people across the world and use the internet as the collaboration platform to get them to solve a hard problem called climate. Well, if
Climate.
that is what Terra is, then Terra's company and organizational structure should also reflect that. So
Hmm.
we've been very clear that we'll be a remote only company from day one. But obviously, remote only is not just about Zoom, right? It is also about social connections and
Yes.
that warm fuzzy that you get with actually people being in the same room, which I
Hmm.
have definitely struggled with. That's one. Um, Second, I think this surprises everyone that I tell them, but I've never met in person my co-founder, one of my co-founders. We had three co-founders. Kamal, the climate co-founder, I've never met her in person
Do you
until about two
intend
weeks
to?
back. So I just
Okay.
met her 2 weeks back. I flew over to Hawaii, where she
Hmm.
lives. But the way it happened was that I was sitting in a cafe in Kormangla called Cafe Terra, which is a very popular startup hangout place, and talking about climate change to someone. And a stranger at the other table walked up to me and said, "Oh, you should talk to my sister-in-law who lives in Hawaii." So
Hmm.
this whole notion that you can find a stranger and trust that stranger to now be your co-founder and essentially get professionally married for the next 10 years of your life, right? Or something
Yeah.
like that, was
Hmm.
something which was tough for me. But also because we'd already made that remote only kind of calculation, to me, it felt like, well, that's the only way something like Terra even gets
Yes.
built out. So that was personally also quite challenging. But otherwise, I think I must say that I've never felt uh, such an ikigai kind of a feeling in my life before professionally. I've always done what I wanted to do, and yet
Hmm.
I feel that I'm at the intersection of what I like to do, what the world will pay me for, what the world has value for, and I will add one more circle to that, what my kids find respect for.
Yes.
So, like the fact that my kids say, good, I'm glad that you're working on this problem versus making money working at Google, Facebook, Amazon, whatever have you, is, I mean, to me, at this stage of my life, it matters.
That must be, such a like the feeling that gives you that content from inside. Like, I just can't, because this is one common thing which I have actually heard each and every climate entrepreneur who has been on the show say the same thing, genuinely the same thing. And there's this kind of content on their face, something which I could just sense at your face also. So, like, that feeling is different, right?
Oh, yes,
So,
definitely.
also, Anshuman, like, tell me that few things that you did really right while creating Terra, few steps that you took were really right at the beginning, which really helped you reach where you are today.
I think so I'll tell you where Terra is at today, right? Which is
Hmm.
Terra has graduated a few thousands of often mostly mid-career professionals
Yeah.
from 25 plus countries across different sectors, and built a viable business model because roughly on an average they each pay us about $1,000. So it's revenue
Hmm.
coming in. So it's a viable business. Now, what is most remarkable about this is actually our NPS. Our NPS is the Net Promoter Score, which is basically a reflection of how much value or how valuable our customers find us. And that NPS is 88. I've never built a product in my life that is at 88. So I'm very
Hmm.
proud of that. And when I look back and why is it 88, right? Is that I had the good judgment to defer to my co-founder Kamal, who had never built a startup before. I had done multiple startups, she had never done, and I deferred to her judgment on what to build because she said something. Her background is that she first of all started working on rural energy access in India with
Hmm.
Harish Hande at Selco. Then she went to Berkeley for a PhD in energy, but came back to Oxford to teach climate change for many years. Got sick of academia, moved to Hawaii, where she started teaching climate change to middle schoolers and high schoolers, like kids,
Hmm.
right? So her mindset is very, let's teach 10 kids if needed, but let's do a bang on amazing job and do
Hmm.
it with empathy, do it with a focus on learning outcomes
Yeah.
and from a sense of humility.
Hmm.
So the fact, and I think what I took away from her approach was to say, look, let's not try to scale. I mean, my background is that if it's not 100 million monthly active users, why are you even getting out of bed,
Hmm.
right? And hers is like, let's do it right for 10 people. And I feel a good thing. The one thing that I did well was to kind of defer to her judgment because it was became clear that what is the point of scaling something that is not worth scaling?
Yes.
So we now feel that because we have this strong NPS, we have this lots of love for within the Terra community for each other and for the company itself. We can now build on top of that something that looks even more significantly more
Hmm.
ambitious. But had we not done that, we would have been, I don't know, some other like another website which has another thing on
Hmm.
climate and so on. I feel that we have something which is a strong brand for a company as young as ours.
And how did you like find the right set of team, the right set of say investors, and the right kind of
Hmm.
people to be with you on board? Because I think this is one of the most important elements for anyone who's building a startup, just to find that right set of people.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think it's actually at a couple of different levels. So the obvious one is the team itself. And
Yep.
because I've done startups before, therefore I had a network, therefore I knew the kind of people that I really wanted to get on board. So my other co-founder is my co-founder from 20 years ago when I was back in college. So
Hmm.
I've known him for a long, long, long time. And so is the early team. So I think that the other interesting thing about Terra, and this is peculiar to us, which is that because we are remote, we live entirely on Slack, and because we are fundamentally a learning inst- place, right? which means a lot of very high caliber people come to learn, and then they fall in love with us, which means that, like, literally the way we had people come on board was to say, hey, if you'd say that you're amazing at marketing, instead of trying to judge you and trying to make this binary call that whether you are joining us or not, why
Hmm.
don't you just join our marketing Slack channel, pick up a problem that you like, solve it for 2 weeks, and then let's chat. So it was almost like, by the like, I think about a third to a half of our company actually were first our learners in some way, or they were
Hmm.
connected to the Terra community, and they said, let me just kind of work with you. So by the time they came inside the company, we'd already known them for months, typically. Right. So that's one. I think the second is we try to do the same thing in our investor base. So we have amazing investors like Nitin Kamath at Zero Daha, who's very passionate about climate, to folks like Deep Kalra at Make My Trip, or Dipinder from Zomato, and Paula Mariwala, and so on. And these are people who have all thought about climate and in various different ways and sustainability for a long time. Now, we actually decided to build not just because we're building the world's largest community of people working in climate, we decided to build a community of investors investing in Terra. So we haven't raised a lot of money, but for the amount of money that we have raised, we have 150 investors. And these range from everything from Denmark's ex-education minister to Iceland's only billionaire to farmers who have actually been part of our programs and they love us enough to write a check. A third of our investors are actually members of the Terra community itself, and industrialists and this and that. So it's this almost like this Avengers kind of a force that we have put together. Like we're saying, look, it and our kind of internal motto is that it takes a planet to solve the planet, right? So therefore, we build the investor base like that, we build the community like that, and we've tried to embody that in the way the company is structured and the way we work.
That's incredible. And my last, not question actually, like, what would be your message to everyone out there who is, say, building for a climate, like building a climate solution and inspiring climate entrepreneur, or someone who's just figuring out that what can I do? Your message for all of
Yeah.
them.
No, I think I actually feel jealous of everyone who is thinking about working in climate compared to 20 years ago when I was starting my career, because this is the first time in my life, and I've seen international development, I've seen all kinds of different things in my 20 years. This is the first time in my career that I'm seeing profit and purpose being connected so obviously together, right? You literally have a civilization scale crisis married to the idea that the next 1,000 unicorns will come from this sector. Like, you can have your cake and eat it too. So to me, it feels like there might be a timing issue at best, which is a couple of years here and there to kind of hold on, stay tight. But you are lucky. You're part of that generation which can actually marry profit and purpose without having to worry too much about anything else. So, what are you doing? Why are you not doing climate? I mean, just as I would have said 20 years ago, why are you not doing internet? I was like, why are you not doing climate? I don't get it. Why are you working on anything else?
No, definitely. And thank you, Anshuman. Thank you for being here. I got to learn so much from you. I'm so excited for this episode to just go out and for people to learn from you. But thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for inspiring us.
No, likewise, Shweta, and I really admire and appreciate what you're doing with Climapreneur. So this is let's get those stories out and let's get 100 million people working in climate this decade.
Yay. Thank you, Anshuman.
Thank you, Shweta.